The fire is already lit. Sit down, breathe, and listen. Carl Jung once wrote that being normal is the ideal of the unsuccessful, because what the world calls normal is often just a polite name for what's already stagnant. That night, there was a strange silence in the air. It wasn't discomfort, nor shyness. It was something else, a kind of restrained depth, a gaze that could see, but wouldn't speak. And then I understood. He wasn't cold. He was introverted, intuitive, and exhausted from not being understood. Today, we're going to talk about those who walk along the edges, the ones who don't shine at parties, nor dominate conversations, but who carry within them a world so vast it cannot be spoken aloud. In this video, you'll understand why intuitive introverts are so deeply misunderstood. You'll discover what Jung saw in these individuals and why he said there's a gift living within them that the world has no name for. But pay attention. By the end, you might realize that what you always thought was weakness was in truth the invisible root of your strength, and how to use it in your favor. They don't talk much. They don't compete for space. They don't shine in noisy places. And because of that, they're easily labeled as weak, disconnected, distant. But Jung saw something else. To him, the intuitive introvert isn't lacking. They are turned inward, someone whose center of gravity lies within. They don't seek approval. They seek meaning. And the problem is that in most environments, this deep hunger for meaning has no place. Imagine a meeting where everyone speaks loudly, defends their ideas, shows results, and there's one of them sitting quietly, listening more than speaking. Inside, they've already noticed what no one else has, where the speech breaks, what's about to collapse, what hasn't been said. This kind of clarity is dangerous because the world doesn't know how to deal with someone who feels too much before even knowing why. Jung warned, the intuitive introvert is a solitary figure because their perception isn't anchored in the visible. It's anchored in reflection, depth, the unconscious, in what is about to happen, in what hasn't yet been named. And because of this, they live a quiet form of exile. They're not disconnected. They're attuned to what most have learned to ignore. This is the invisible prison. To live in a world that values performance, speed, sociability, and dismisses silence, pause, depth. Introversion in this world seems like a flaw, but to Jung, it was precisely the path of the soul. If this resonated with you, maybe you're not out of place. Maybe you're just surrounded by people who don't speak your inner language. Carl Jung described intuition as a psychic function tied to the unconscious. It's not based on facts, nor on logical deductions. It simply knows. But there are two paths to this intuition. One looks outward. It picks up on the environment, the future, external possibilities. The other looks inward. It senses what's buried, what's invisible, what has not yet manifested. This is where the intuitive introvert comes in. While the world seeks evidence, they feel patterns. While others follow the script, They see the hidden narrative behind words, gestures, and between the lines. Jung said that the intuitive introvert has a spontaneous perception of the unconscious. This means they receive inner images, symbols, hunches, connections that emerge as fleeting visions, as if the unconscious is constantly whispering something. And it's no exaggeration. It's common for these people to walk into a room and sense something strange in the air. Even when everyone's smiling, they detect the hidden tension. Even without knowing someone's story, they have a sense of already knowing. It's as if they live with an antenna always turned on, but not for what's being said, for what's being repressed, for what's trying to surface. But this sensitivity comes at a cost, because what reaches them isn't clear. It's symbolic, it's fragmented. It's like a dream you can feel but can't explain. And when they try to translate it, everything sounds strange, mystical, exaggerated. So they learn early to keep it to themselves. Not because they have nothing to say, but because the world still hasn't learned how to listen to that kind of language. It's a gift, but like every gift, it's also a burden. They remain silent, not out of shyness, but because they've tried speaking and were labeled as intense, confusing, or weird. Intuitive introverts learn early that their words are rarely well received, not because they lack logic, but because they speak another language. A language the modern world, fast, practical, literal, no longer knows how to hear. Imagine sensing something deeply symbolic, a feeling, an inner image, an idea not yet fully formed. You try to explain, but the other person expects a direct, concrete, objective answer. And what you have is anything but that. Jung said that the intuitive introvert receives revelations, but they are revelations without subtitles. They rise like ancient symbols from a forgotten ocean. They go beyond what the eye can see. So why do they fall silent? Because every attempt to translate what they experience sounds like delusion to hurried ears. Because it's too painful to watch a precious insight be mocked, misinterpreted, or simply dismissed. They don't withdraw because they don't want connection. They withdraw because they've already realized not every place is fertile ground for what they carry. And that leads them to a delicate place, living with intensity, in silence, having deep intuitions, but hiding them, sensing someone's inner fractures, yet smiling as if unaware. This is the dilemma. Either you reveal yourself and risk being distorted, or you protect yourself and pay the price of isolation. Jung understood this, and that's why he treated such individuals with almost reverent respect, because within their silence, there was more truth than in many speeches. Once, Jung shared the case of a young patient who walked into his office and said, "Doctor, I have a black snake coiled around my abdomen." He could have laughed, he could have corrected her, but he didn't, because Jung understood that wasn't a symptom. It was a symbolic image emerging from the unconscious. To most people, that would sound like madness, but to the intuitive introvert, that kind of language makes perfect sense. Images, metaphors, inner visions, not as decoration, but as legitimate expressions of inner reality. This is one of their deepest pains, to perceive the world in symbols, but live in a literal environment where people want direct answers, where everything must fit into short sentences, where there's no room for mystery.
Have you ever tried to explain a strange feeling about someone and been dismissed as if you were exaggerating? Or tried to describe a deep perception and realized there simply weren't enough words? That's the language of intuitive introverts, and most of the time, no one around them speaks it. That's why many live in symbolic silence, as if carrying an internal library written in a language no one else can read. It's not isolation, it's the understanding that some things can't be translated into words. Jung once said, "What we cannot express controls us in silence." And for the intuitive introvert, this is the struggle: to give shape to the invisible, to name the unspeakable, and still continue to exist among others.
The world says, "Be yourself," but then it quietly adds, "as long as you fit in." For the intuitive introvert, being who they are isn't just hard. Sometimes it's almost impossible. Because they don't just notice the obvious, they pick up on the subtext, what's in the air, what hasn't been said. And that makes social interaction an overwhelmingly intense experience. Imagine walking down a hallway and sensing that someone is distressed, even if they're smiling. Or stepping into a room and immediately feeling the tension, the bitterness, the unspoken resentment. But no one talks about it. And then you ask yourself, am I overreacting, or am I the only one who sees it? Jung said these individuals live ahead of the group's psychological time. They sense what others haven't yet become conscious of. But there's a cost. The more you perceive, the harder it becomes to pretend. Pretend you didn't notice. Pretend everything's fine. Pretend that space nourishes you, when in truth, it drains you. That's the paradox. The same gift that connects you to the depths can also separate you from almost everything else. And then you wonder, is this a blessing or an elegant prison? In Jungian psychology, that question is valid because every symbolic light also casts a shadow. And those who see too much bear the weight of carrying it alone.
Carl Jung never saw intuitive introverts as a problem to be fixed. On the contrary, he saw them as living bridges between the unconscious and the visible world, as sensitive antennas picking up on the symbolic forces behind events. For Jung, these people hold an essential role within the collective, to see ahead, to feel more deeply, to name what hasn't yet been seen. While the world is distracted by appearances, the intuitive introvert senses what's forming beneath. They live on the edge between the now and the not yet, and that position, uncomfortable, solitary, intense, is in fact an archetypal mission. It means looking through the layers and understanding the depth in each one. Jung said the intuitive introvert lives with one foot in the collective unconscious. That's why their intuitions aren't merely personal. They come from a deeper place, from the symbolic layer of existence. These perceptions aren't fantasies, they're warnings, visions, directions. The problem? The world has lost its sensitivity to this kind of language, and those who still speak in symbols feel like foreigners in their own home. But Jung was clear. The intuitive function is the one that perceives the most distant possibilities. It is the eye of the soul, seeing through the veils of reality. And then everything shifts, because what once seemed dysfunctional is finally understood as a rare form of clarity. The intuitive introvert is not here to adapt. They're here to remind us that the invisible is also real, and that the soul speaks its own language, even if the world has forgotten how to listen.
All right. You've understood that what you feel has a name, that your way of perceiving isn't a flaw, but a gift. That Jung saw you with reverence, not as someone to be corrected. But now what? How do you remain whole in a world that demands adaptation at all costs? This is the new crisis, because the clarity of the intuitive introvert doesn't just bring relief, it also brings a brutal question. If the world never sees me for who I am, will I still see myself? This is where many begin to break. They try to reshape themselves to fit. They silence their intuition to appear more normal. They speed up, expose themselves, force things. But there's a heavy cost to playing that game. You may begin to abandon yourself, little by little, until you no longer remember which part was ever truly yours. Jung spoke of individuation as the most difficult and most essential process. Becoming who you truly are, even if it costs you superficial belonging. And this is the crossroad of the intuitive introvert. Either live by the truth you feel, or for the applause you never needed. It's painful. But within that pain is a rare kind of freedom, the freedom of no longer needing to explain yourself, the freedom of not having to fit into spaces that were never made for the soul.
Jung knew that intuitive introverts don't easily belong, but he also knew this isn't a flaw, it's a crossing. And every crossing needs an inner map. Here are 3 compasses he left behind, not to make you fit, but to help preserve your wholeness. 1. Honor your solitude. It's not absence, it's a temple. Jung said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Time alone, for the intuitive introvert, isn't escape. It's maintenance. It's where they filter the excess of the world, reorganize symbols, and make sense of their own intuitions. Don't blame yourself for needing silence. That's where your soul breathes. 2. Give form to your intuition, or it becomes a burden. Jung warned, unexpressed intuitions turn into anxiety, because seeing the invisible without expressing it leads to overload. You must give shape to what you feel. Write, paint, teach, study, sing, create. It doesn't matter how, but give existence to what you see inside. That's the path to turning your gift into guidance and your clarity into contribution. 3. Connect with those who also feel, even if they're few. You don't need many. You need presences who understand your language. Jung said the collective unconscious unites what the world separates, which means there are others who feel the invisible too. They're not in the crowds, but they exist. And when they meet, there's silence, yes, but there's also resonance, because finally, no one has to explain too much. These 3 steps won't make life easy, but they make the soul possible. And for the intuitive introvert, that is already salvation.
Every visible society was built upon invisible pillars, and nearly all of those pillars only had names after the fact. Dostoevsky, Virginia Woolf, Emily Dickinson, Kafka. None of them were social butterflies. None of them fit in easily. But they all had something in common. They saw what their time could not yet perceive. And because of that, they were misunderstood, ignored, silenced, until time caught up with their language. Jung understood this deeply, He himself lived on the margins for years, speaking of symbols, archetypes, dreams, and myths in an era that only valued the concrete, the measurable, the tangible. But he persisted, and today his work silently supports much of what we call psychology, spirituality, and self-knowledge. And this is what most people don't see. Intuitive introverts are like roots. They don't shine, they don't show off, they're not celebrated. But without them, the trees of thought wouldn't stand. You might be one of them. Maybe you've always felt out of place, heavy, strange. Maybe you believe there's something wrong with you for being too deep, too sensitive, too quiet. But maybe what you are is exactly what the world is missing. And maybe, as Jung once said, what lies beneath is what holds everything together. That night, I understood everything. And ever since then, whenever the world feels heavy, I return to the fire. And I remember, you don't need to be seen to have worth. You don't need to speak loudly to be heard by those who matter. You don't need to explain yourself to fit in, because there are places where what you carry is exactly what holds everything up. Jung knew, those who see the invisible often walk alone, but not out of weakness, out of calling. So if today you feel like you don't belong, like you carry something no one understands, like you live at an inner rhythm that feels strange to others, maybe you are one of those invisible roots, an intuitive introvert, someone whose silent clarity is more needed now than ever. That night, I understood everything, and ever since then, whenever the world feels heavy, I return to the fire. See you soon.